The point of this passage, this story that Ken read to us, and for that matter, the point of the whole gospel, is that Jesus comes into the middle of life. Jesus comes into the middle of your life. Whatever it is that you're dealing with, Jesus comes. There's nothing in your life that leaves Jesus out. Jesus is not going to say, oh, well, I went to the movie so I can hang out here for a while, take a break. Jesus is a part of your life, wherever you are, at all times. Now, Jesus doesn't make everything better. It's not some kind of magic wand. You know that. But He does enter into your life. And He walks with you until things get better or you've managed to make it through. Sometimes the only way you can manage to make it through is with Jesus walking with you. Now, Jesus knew one thing, and that is at the very heart of this passage. And that is, pain is inescapable. You know that? Anybody managed to escape pain so far in their life? I didn't see any hands. I was hoping maybe somebody could help me with that. He knew that was true, not just because He saw it around Him, but in His own life, He dealt with His own share of pain. I'm curious for a moment. How many of you are dealing with physical pain right now? Okay. How many of you are dealing with emotional pain right now? No one is exempt. No one is exempt. Neither was this widow. At the AMA last week, Ask Me Anything, someone, I think it might have been Joan, asked me, why are so few women mentioned in the Bible? It's either you or Judith. And the answer was really easy. Because she's a nobody. She was a nobody. Women and children in biblical times, maybe even in the Middle East then, and maybe still now, didn't count. Literally didn't count. When the gospel tells us there were 5,000 that Jesus fed, it says, not including women and children, because they're nobodies. She was a nobody. Now, I want to look back for just a second at last week's scripture. It was about the centurion, right? The centurion's slave was dying. Now, the centurion's name was not mentioned either, but the title was. He was a centurion. He had power. He had people under him. He had servants. Now, to say centurion, that's like saying Mr. President. He was an important person. She was a nobody. Those two taken together tell us a couple of significant things. One is that the gospel is for all. From the highest to the lowest. From those who have the most prestige to those who have the least. From those who are looked up with great authority to those who are outcast. Jesus comes to them all. The second thing is that pain is for all. No one escapes it. Doesn't matter how much money you got. Doesn't matter how many friends you got. Doesn't matter how many times you come to church or don't come to church. Everyone has pain. Now, as you heard Ken read the scripture, did you feel the emotions of it? Did you feel what she might have been feeling? Sometimes it's hard because the stories are brief, and not a lot of detail. And sometimes, like last week's, we say, oh, this is the story of Jesus resurrecting someone, and we put it in our little categories and put it with all the other stories that match, and then we move on. But in order to really see what this passage is about for you, you need to understand the feelings that are there, what she felt. Unless you really get that, you miss the full impact of the story. And if you were there, you would have seen her cry. You would have seen the funeral procession. You would have seen grief. But when we hear it, sometimes we go past it. Now, if you look at her in the story, first she's a widow, right? We have lots of widows here. Do you remember what it felt like when you first lost your husband? Pretty powerful, pretty painful. And it never really goes away, does it? You know, Martha, this coming Saturday, Claude will have been gone 17 years. Never really goes away. And on top of that, she loses her only son. I know there are some in this room who know that feeling. It's just not the natural order of things. To lose someone you love is hard enough. To lose a child, she's got to go. Not only has her son died, but her own life now is a desperate situation. Her husband left her no life insurance. There was no such thing. And so she depended on her son to take care of her. That's what happened in those times. Your children took care of you. If you had no children, you were in trouble. You had nothing. No way of making anything. And as William Willman puts it, now her Social Security program is being carried out in a funeral pyre. Her life looks desperate. The pain is excruciating. Her future is bleak. Singer-guitarist Eric Clapton knew some of that pain. Let's watch.
And when he was born, I was drinking. And he was really the chief reason that I went back to treatment. Because I really did love this boy. And I thought, I know he's like a little baby, but he can see me and he can see what I'm doing. And I'm tired of this.
So it was for Connor that Clapton finally quit for good and vowed to be the kind of father he never had. But that was not to be. In March of '91, Clapton was in New York to visit Connor, who was living in the city with his mother. The phone rang.
And his mother was hysterical. She was hardly able to make sense. But she said he was dead.
He had accidentally fallen 49 floors from the window of his mother's apartment.
And I remember putting the phone down and calmly walking from my hotel to that place as if nothing had happened. And I walked past the street, and this is a terrible thing of shame for me, which I'll never, ever, perhaps, recover from. And seeing a crowd of people and a paramedic van, and knowing that he was there, and walking by. And I'll punish myself forever about why didn't I run? Why didn't I go to see him? And the truth is I couldn't. I was so frightened.
It's called Tears in Heaven.
There's peace, I'm sure, and I know there'll be no more tears in heaven.
His song of lament ends in an echo of that which is lifted up in Revelation 21. Beyond the door, there's hope for sure. And I know there'll be no more tears in heaven. Powerful, powerful stuff. And I want you to know, it's not just lay people that have to deal with life and death and faith. Martin Luther's daughter, Magdalene, was dying at a very young age. And as he talked to her, he saw great faith. In his own confession, however, he said, I'm angry with myself that I am unable to rejoice from my heart and be thankful to God. Yet nevertheless, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. You hear what Martin Luther, a great man of faith, pastor, one who began the Protestant Reformation in many ways. His daughter was dying, and he didn't want it to be. He couldn't bear the thought of losing her, even though his faith told him she would be with God. In the midst of that pain and suffering and even doubt, he said, but my faith tells me, whether we live, whether we die, we are with the Lord. Most of us believe that death is the last word because it's so powerful. We even say nothing is certain but death and taxes. However, Jesus wasn't about death. When that funeral procession was going down the street, he pulled up in his big old caddy and he blocked off the procession and he got out of the car and he went to the casket, which was open, and he said, son, come out. Come into life. Your mother needs you. Jesus is about life. He brings life to everyone. In my musing, I thought, if Jesus taught in seminary, he would have had no class on officiating funerals. What would be the point? Instead, he would probably have a class called The Basics of Resurrection, Life 101. Right? And if he was going to teach on weddings, he'd have a basic lab on making wine. Water to wine 101. Jesus was about life. In the midst of this pain that's inescapable, Jesus comes and offers life. His whole ministry, his teachings, his life is about living, finding abundant life. That sums up his life, his ministry, and his message. When Jesus looked at that boy and said, young man, I say to you, rise, he wasn't just talking to that boy. He was talking to you, and you, and you, and me. He was talking to everyone. Young men, rise. Young women, rise. Middle-aged men, middle-aged women, rise. Old men, old women, rise. Find life. Walk away from death and choose life. Max C. Dunham tells a story about a little pamphlet he found that had an interesting title. It said, Annie doesn't live here anymore. Well, Annie wrote this little pamphlet. She talked about how her life had been a mess. She lived her life with no restraints on her passions or her deeds. But by some miracle, God broke through into her life and gave her true life. She found that love. In the pamphlet, she talks about the problems and pain, the seaminess and the sorrow that she lived with. But she talked about how now she had new life. And so across the door of her old life, she had placed a sign that said, Andy doesn't live here anymore. I choose life. Choose life. In the past, in some Russian villages, especially at a time when many children did not survive infancy, villages would have on the outskirts of town a mourning hut. Whereas a mother would lose a child, she would go and live in that hut for a month, should be able to mourn, work through her grief, hopefully, live in solitude. And at the end of that month, they would set that hut on fire with her inside. She had a choice. Would she choose life or choose death? If she came out, that meant she was choosing life, and her task then was to make the next hut, the next fire. Choose life. Leave the tomb behind. That's the message of Jesus. So as we approach Holy Communion today, I want to invite you to join in to the middle of this story. Become that widow. But instead of being on a backwards street 2,000 years ago, imagine yourself and imagine the worst thing that could happen to you this week. The thing that you worry about most in this next coming week. Or maybe the thing you worry about most happening in this next year. Bring that up as you come to communion. Offer that to Jesus and then choose life. Leave it aside. Walk away. Leave the tomb of your worries and your doubts and your fears behind. And choose life.